This is Nicholas Alexiou on the Department of Sociology at Queen's College and founder and director of the Hellenic American Project. In our series of oral history interviews, we're very pleased and happy to have today Mr. Stavros, which is a lovely name, Stavros Anastasio. Thank you very much for accepting this invitation. Your contribution to the documenting the new second generation Greek Americans is very important for the city of New York and in general for the Greeks in the States. Stavros, welcome to the interview, and let's have your first thoughts and descriptions about who you are, your place of birth, family roots, where you grew up, various things from your childhood as far as concern the community.
All right, wonderful. So first off, before I begin, thank you for having me for this interview. So as you know, my name is Stavros Anastasio. I was born here in the US in Astoria, New York, which is a major hub for a lot of Greek Americans. And my family roots are from two different places in Greece. So on my mother's side, we're from Kefalonia, so we're on the islands. And then my father's side comes from a small village up in Epirus. It's a tiny mountain village called Pyrgos, and it's near the border of Albania. And it's near Yanina, which I know is a major place that has a lot of history, a lot of museums too. So I've been there a couple of times while going to Greece over the summer. So I have the best of both worlds. I come from the mountains and from the islands. And just to go into detail about some of the reasons why my family moved from Greece, they emigrated. So it was my grandparents who did the move, and this was during the eve of World War II. So after the war was over, my papu, my grandfather, he wanted to go to America to make a name for himself, to make a business. And he had met his wife, and they married a week right before they left. So she came with him, and it was a love at first sight sort of story. They met when they were paying their taxes. So it was beautiful circumstances. And they came and they opened up a small diner out in Brooklyn. It was, humble. They made great business. My papu, he retired when he was around 45. So, he lived a pretty good life. That's when he had my father and his two sisters. And on my mom's side, her parents came from Kefalonia, Cephalonia. And it was actually an arranged marriage, but they fell in love with each other. My grandfather, he had worked in the army, and my yaya was a stay-at-home wife, and together they had around 4 kids. So generally the reasons why they moved was, again, to sort of make a name for themselves, to give our families a better life here in America, while at the same time also continuing our Greek traditions. And that was something that was passed down to me, as well as to my cousins, my siblings, as well as the rest of the family, us learning the language, being accustomed with Greek traditions, whether it was going to church, learning the language, the history, especially mythology, learning our rituals, the food, most importantly. And I think for that reason, that sort of shaped me who I am today and how I view the world. And it's something that I feel really passionate about, and it was one of the reasons why I chose to undertake my study, which was Byzantine studies and classical literature. That was my bachelor's, and now going into education, because us Greeks, that was one of our forefronts. I definitely want to continue that and sort of infuse my own background into that profession. And the way I identify myself now, I identify myself as Greek American. I would say that I have a lot of things from Greece that I value highly and I try to emulate. And then there's also stuff from America that I also identify as. I think it'd be pretty counterintuitive to sort of take on one side while disregarding the other. I know that, I was born and raised here in America, but I have a whole history, a whole background that comes from Greece that I definitely want to explore. when I was younger, not so much. It was, for me, my attitude was like, how come the kids are playing basketball when I have to go to Greek school? But having grown older now, I think I grew that curiosity, and that's what made me want to dive deeper into my background. And because of that endeavor, I'm wholly more appreciative of it.
So that's an excellent introduction. So growing up, I understand that at home, the Greek culture, the language, the music, the food was very present, right? And you had friends who were both other Americans, other ethnicities, but also Greek. And also, you had the chance to visit your parents' places or other places in Greece when you were a child or now as a young adult?
Yes. So just going back to my memories, when I was younger, the mission was for us to go to Greece every summer. My cousins were lucky; they got to stay there for 2 months, but we only did 1 month. But it was good. Um, and for us, we were especially fortunate because our grandparents were already established in Greece, if that makes sense. My grandparents, they had a house in Athens in Grifada, which is a major tourist site. We also had property out in the small village in Epiro, in Catalonia. So there was always a home for us to go to in Greece. It wasn't as if we were renting out hotels and we were just island hopping. It was more so we stayed in Athens for a week. We went to the village for 2 weeks. Then we came back. Then, we'd go to an island or two. So it's funny because whenever I tell people I've never been to Santorini or Mykonos, they get actually really shocked. They're like, "Oh, but you should go there. That's what it means. That's where Greece is at." And I said, "No, it's at the village. If you really want to get down to the history, where you come from, as well as just either going to the beach or just seeing traditional Greek life, I think it's in those places where either your family is from or where you grew up, where you can find that, rather than going to the tourist spots or just going to all the popular places, which is something that I really appreciated. So, we went to the Acropolis, obviously, we did the bus tours and everything. But at the same time, we also took the moments to either visit this one village that a relative was from or just to go on drives and to go sightseeing. So those were memories that I always cherished. And we were basically like nomads because it wasn't just my immediate family. It was all the cousins, aunts, and uncles. So we all traveled in like big groups. It was always, okay, we're going to go to Athens, go to our islands where we're from, and then we're going to meet back here in like 2 weeks. So there was always like a loose plan. And we get to do whatever we wanted. So I really appreciated it. And that really helped me to get exposed a lot to what it is for being Greek. In America, a lot of people express it as, just eating the food or knowing like a phrase or two in Greek, but, being in Greece and really experiencing for yourself. Yes, I learned the language, I used it more. I had Greek food, I bought like books in Greek, but it was that nostalgia that I felt personally when I was there that really makes me treasure those memories, especially when I had the company of family.
Well, Greece means a lot to you, from what I understand, and there are some elements of the Greek culture that you think have have some kind of greater importance. Is something that you like to transmit to the next generation, to children when you might have? Do you think that there are some aspects of Greek culture that are universal and somehow you feel pretty close to them?
Right. That's a good question. So a lot of the Greek values that I see and that I appreciate, I see mostly with my parents and my family. I think family is one of the core units that really help to emphasize Greek, Greek values, morals. The idea of hospitality is philoxenia. That's one aspect that I definitely want to pass down onto my kids. The language, absolutely, that's most important. I feel language is one of the biggest aspects of Greek culture that needs to be passed down in order for it to be sort of maintained. Just from research that I've done in cultures in general, when language is usually the first aspect to go while we see a decline in that. So when I have kids, hopefully one day, I definitely do want them to have the language, just so, they can speak to their relatives. One of my biggest motivations for learning it was because I wanted to talk to my Gayan Papu. I didn't want it to be where, like, they don't speak English and I only speak English. Plus, I think it adds like another layer of that appreciation. So the language, the hospitality, and just general ideas of just being a good person, having some sense of honor and respect as well, just for your fellow person, and I think that goes a long way. And I think that's something that's often forgotten, especially in today's world and climate. And yeah, those are some of my main things. The church, especially, I would want my kids to grow up in the Greek Orthodox faith, and just again to have that appreciation, and just for them to grow up and to be the people that I would want to see in the world and to make it better.
How important was or still is for you to live in an area, a neighborhood, a region with a substantial number of other Greek Americans,
Right.
and you, as of course, given how young you are, you have any involvement with various ethnic associations that exist here. Both the Cephalonians have a society in Astoria, and also the Epirotes also. They have a Maverick Museum and a nice house in Astoria. But also as a student, you were involved in any Greek American organization or student organization?
Right. So I'll answer the first one with Astoria, then I'll get to the organization. So my entire mother's side, they lived in Astoria actually, so there was always an excuse for me to go. I had they were lived on like right on Ditmar, so it was easy to get to them. And then I had my other yaya on my dad's side, who was all the way out in Steinway. So every Friday there was always an excuse to go. And one of the things that I really thought that was amazing was, you can walk down the streets and you can see the presence of the Greeks who were there, whether it be through their shops, the music that was playing, or just listening to people speaking the language as you were walking down the streets. That's really awesome. And my cousins who lived there had, because they were living in the area, they had more friends. And just from us saying, oh, we're Greek, there was already that layer of familiarity. And I think that sort of holds true today. Whenever I see someone, we're talking and we both mention how, oh, we're Greek, immediately there's sort of a level of understanding or rapport that I think if it was just any other American, it sort of wouldn't be there. So growing up in Astoria, I was very fortunate to see that culture and for it to be tangible. It's still alive and well, I would say, not to the extent that it was back then when I was growing up. And if you were to ask my cousins, they would say that even way back, it was even more so tangible because they're much older than me. And growing up and going to school, so I grew up in Bayside, Flushing area. So there were some Greeks there, but it wasn't the predominant or the majority. I was involved in a lot of student organizations. So the high school I went to, they had a Greek club, obviously. Queens College, where I went to, you had the Ikaros Club. And one of the things that I realized, especially back in high school, is that a lot of these clubs sort of fell on deaf ears in a sort of way, because one thing that I noticed about a lot of Greek Americans is that there isn't all that much motivation or mobilization to sort of get together and to celebrate our culture. It's more or less that we sort of wear this badge saying, yeah, we're Greeks, and that's the end of it. I remember, even though it was a Greek club, we would try to do events, try to have sort of nights out where we go to restaurants or cafes and no one would come. It'd be a struggle to sort of get students involved and motivated. But in college, it was sort of different. You saw a lot more students who were motivated and wanted to participate in these things. And I think that was a similar situation to me and also to perhaps a lot of other students my age, is that we sort of had, we say yes, yes, we're Greek, but then as the years go by, we sort of have that realization. It's like, okay, we want to be more involved. Whereas when we were in our early teens, it was sort of like, yeah, I'm Greek, and like that's the end of it. So that was one of the trends I noticed in the organizations that I was a part of, is that there wasn't really a lot of that motivation or encouragement. But now, seeing, being much older and wiser, hopefully, you start to see a little bit about that. So whether a student who goes to college, they end up taking like a Greek course, or they take a history course that mentions about ancient Greece or something happens down the line where they start to have that curiosity or sort of that drive to want to learn more years later down the line. And I think that's one thing you can see with a lot of the organizations that we have now. So for me personally, so I was involved with a lot of the Greek clubs at my school. Also at my local parish, Goya, I was a huge member of. So again, like, Greek Americans were just getting together and we're playing basketball, but it was good. And with my job as Greek reporter, now where I talk about and I put a spotlight on a lot of these Greek activities, stories that happen in the diaspora, now I start to see that there is a greater appreciation for a lot of Greek endeavors as well as Greek Americans. And my only hope is that that continues. But I feel like for me, as well as other Greek Americans, that involvement and that wanting to learn and to know more sort of comes back later on down in life.
Excellent. From the research we do at the Hellenic American Project, we have seen and we wrote, we spoke about it, that for the first time after the great immigration wave of 1900s, for the first time in the past 10, 20 years, the American-born Greeks are numerically more than the immigrant generation, than the Greek-born, than the foreign-born. Do you see that will be a continuity of this of Greek culture, of Greek communities in the States? As a young person, you think that it's going to be more assimilated, more invisible as an ethnic group, or they continue to have the cultural distinctions that they have now?
Good question.
Because we know that until now, the dominant structures that form the community are the structures that were formed by the immigrant generations.
Right.
Either that was the Greek town or the Greek press or the church, and all those institutions, they play a significant role one way or another. But now, if they keep functioning towards the needs of the Greek-born, of the foreign-born, instead of realizing the great transformation that has happened, that we have new generations outnumbering the Greek-born. We have the American generation that is larger now than the Greek-born generation. If they don't change, those institutions are destined to collapse. So I think it is a critical moment for the new generation like yourself to start organizing the community with institutions and forces that serve your interest, serve your needs, as Americans of Greek descent. And I want to see if there is any vision or any discussions among people of your generation towards that direction.
That's a good question. For me, and based off of like the research that I did with Historia, I remember one of the sources that I had to work with. It was a talk that was given where there was this one young Greek American who spoke up saying, well, we do want to be involved in our community, but at the same time, we also want our needs to be addressed, and also what it is that we want to accomplish. And for me, what I noticed was that there was a sort of paradigm shift that took place in regards to a lot of the institutions versus now, how a lot of Greek Americans sort of express their culture or who they are, where instead of it being, okay, you know, going to Greek school or being a part of like our Greek community, it's more so independent, where I express Greek culture in my own unique way. And for me, that's fine. I think that's considering how we're moving or becoming more technology based. I think that at the same time, there also has to be some cohesiveness among us in regards to that. So like with my job, for instance, with me working in the Greek Reporter, one of the things that I appreciate about it is that it brings to light a lot of the Greek American community, what it is that we're doing, our endeavors, and just, you know, bringing that to the attention of a lot of people. And it's great because it's a cohesive base of like information, but at the same time, it's all virtual. We don't have like a physical newspaper. So because of that, there's sort of like a hub. And I think for a lot of Greek Americans, what we need to do is sort of create that. So, well, I do believe like some of our institutions need to adapt. I don't think that they will perish or collapse, especially anytime soon, because I believe that there'll always be that interest and that incentive to want to have that physical communal aspect. I don't think that would ever go away, because at the same time, while it is expressing Greek identity, it also brings about different reactions and different effects. You know, virtually, while you might expressing yourself personally, how Greek affects you, it's also impersonal rather than being communal, where you're all sharing the sort of same vision, the same intention. So I think that, I think also one of the things we have to do as Greek Americans is continue to uphold our narrative, our stories, where we are, where we come from, our histories. I think there needs to be extra vigilance in that as well, just so there's something tangible for the next generations to have or to fall back on. And just again, to continue fostering that sense of community while at the same time addressing the current circumstances with technology, as well as just trying to evolve and to adapt to a lot of these changing times.
Excellent. I hope that goes towards the correct direction. Also, I know that you did some research and you mentioned it about Astoria, and because you grew up in Astoria or you're familiar with Astoria for a long time, do you see any changes? Tell us about your research and your paper about Astoria.
Right. So, for the end of my bachelor career, I written a paper and I titled it "Changing Patterns in Astoria: Conceptualization of Greek Identity," because that was one of the things I wanted to research about personally, but at the same time, that was sort of an area that wasn't looked into a whole lot. So that was one of the things I wanted to pinpoint, especially for my generation or a more modern generation, how Greek identity, how we conceptualize it, how we experience it. And I chose Astoria especially because not only is it the most predominant Greek town that we have, but also because it sort of holds a special place in my heart, because having grown up there, having walked down the streets, and having seen the changes firsthand, that was one of the major topics that I wanted to research and look into. And And it was a good experience because I interviewed a few of the people who lived there, who worked there, who owned businesses. I got to see a lot of different perspectives from a bunch of different people. And one of the things that I realized is, again, it wasn't back then, several generations ago when we had a lot of the Greek immigrants come by, as well as the generation afterwards. It was a lot more. It was a lot more tangible, the Greek identity, whether it be walking down the street, seeing a couple of shops that were Greek, or again, hearing like the taverna music, or going by and listening to people speak Greek. It sort of resembled sort of a Greek nightlife, or just a whole like Greek experience. And I think in today, there's still aspects of that has still survived. You have some of the small businesses which are still being impacted by the current pandemic, but at the same time, you still have people who want to keep these establishments going. You have it where even though you have a lot more cultural and ethnic groups, you still have that tangible Greek identity happening, because you also have a lot of Greek immigrants currently who are coming from Greece in order to settle in America. And they have a lot of them the similar patterns as immigrants who were coming during the second wave, where they stay in a lot of urban areas, a lot of places near like ports. So you do have it where, you know, you're walking down the street and you might hear someone speak Greek once in a while. So I think while the area is still changing and it will continue to change, I think you still have elements that are still there. And like how I said before previously, I think it's up to us whether or not we want to continue to maintain that. So whether it be us mobilizing, sponsoring Greek events, or again, just spreading the word or talking about it and inviting others to participate in that as well, I think that is one of our call to actions that we have to think about. And I think now is as good as time as any, because right now, a lot of people like me, we're in our early 20s and we're starting out our life. And for us, it's a decision where, do we want to continue with that curiosity? Do we want to continue with that that motivation to want to learn more?
Excellent. Recently, there is a debate among Greek Americans as far as concern the vote in the elections in Greece. It is a suggestion that Greeks who live in the States should somehow be in their convenience to vote from distance, instead of those who are eligible to travel and go and vote in Greece. But if there is a possibility to vote from here, and also it is a second demand by certain sources in the Greek American community who ask for representation in the Greek Parliament. What are your thoughts about voting and also have a representation in the Greek Parliament?
For us Greek Americans?
Yes.
Okay. So an issue like that, I haven't done a lot of research or looked up on it a lot. What I can speak about that is my own personal experience of being in Greece as a Greek American. You know, one aspect that I find really interesting is that for a lot of Greeks who are from Greece, who stay there, a lot of them see us Greek Americans and they sort of think, oh, well, they're not really Greek, or, you know, you're American, but you just happen to have like a Greek background. And me personally, I never experienced it much, just because, again, my family was well established in Greece. We had property. A lot of people knew my Yayam Papu, so it was more or less that we were invited. But I know for other people, they experienced that very differently. So, and it is an interesting topic overall, how Greeks think of Greek Americans, and that whole idea of, well, questioning heritage, culture, as well as and who we call ourselves and identity. I think that's a major conversation that, again, needs to be had. And with regards to Parliament, again, I'm not familiar with a lot of the political dealings, unfortunately, in that regard. But I think it's a really important conversation that needs to be had among us.
Also, we live in this extraordinary and unprecedented situation now with the pandemic and the COVID-19. Tell us about your personal experience with this dramatic stage of our lives, how that affected your studies, your work, your social life, the family. What do you think about this? How you have experienced it?
That's a really good question. So I think one of the biggest aspects that got affected the most was family. Um, my grandmother, she lives not that far away from me where I am, and I, visit her almost every week. So for that to be taken away, for example, was a huge adjustment. Um, being, only with my immediate family, not having that social aspect, that communal aspect, that was very tough on me as well as my family. And it took a lot of time adjusting with. And for a lot of, not just Greeks, but a lot of Americans in general, one of our biggest concerns was after graduating, how we would find a job, how we would sort of stay afloat in these times. And for me, I was very fortunate because, and I think this is sort of a testament for a lot of Greeks and how we view helping one another out. With my job as Greek reporter, I approached them saying, I wanted to work, experience the film of journalism. And they were very fortunate because I met with the person who ran it in person. Anastasiou is his name. And one of the things I also realized that he did was he actually runs another program called Hire a Greek, where a lot of Greek businesses who are looking for Greek employees, it's a good referral program where, you can sort of help a fellow Greek or Greek American out with getting a job. So it was aspects that I saw like that gave me a little bit of hope. And it was good working, obviously, but it was good to work for a Greek company and to spread a lot of news on topics that I myself was really motivated about. So I was really fortunate to have that experience and to continue having that experience. And in terms of my studies and my grades, because I was doing my research paper on Astoria during the semester where the pandemic hit, it was very tough on me because I did a lot of field work. I went around Astoria, I took pictures of a lot of the neighborhoods. I was doing interviews with a lot of the residents there. I interviewed one college student who was living there. I interviewed this one person who had an accounting business. And there was one artist who I interviewed out in Brooklyn, Jenny Marketu, about her book that she did on Astoria, where she also did a lot of photography. So it was a shame that got cut short because I still had a couple of months where I could keep doing that. And I had to sort of adjust my paper and adapt it to having it be just a full-on academic paper. One of my wishes is for me to go back to that and to continue with what I really originally wanted to do. But because of the pandemic and the experience, it also brought on a lot of new ideas that I want to do. So one idea that I'm sort of in talks with right now with one of my friends, he's really good with video editing, is I want to do sort of a documentary for how Greek Americans were impacted with the pandemic and how they were hit. I initially wanted it to be a summer project, but a lot of people, they still felt uncomfortable with not coming outside. So I just want to hold off on it for now, but I'm in the early planning stages of it. And you still see a lot of endeavors for Greek Americans trying to connect with one another. Obviously we have the life-giving art exhibit, which I was personally a huge fan of, and aspects like that, I really want to spread the word. I remember one interview I did with the Greek reporter where I interviewed these two girls who did a Greek dating show during the pandemic when it hit, just to connect a lot of Greek Americans from across the country. And when I interviewed them and I asked them, there were two sisters from Ohio. When I asked them, I said, "What made you want to do a project like this?" They said, "We just wanted to connect our community. You know, we can't go out anymore. We can't gather. We can't go to a lot of like the events. So we wanted to do something like this in order to help fill that void." And I think that was one aspect that I saw that sort of gave me some hope or some appreciation, was that solidarity. And hopefully even after that, it can only continue to grow. And, you know, I have hopes and high expectations for the future of a lot of Greek Americans because of it.
And also, right in the middle of the pandemic, we had a new movement as a result, as a reaction to police brutality against African Americans. And we see again the issue of racism or of institutions that function in a different way than the needs and the shape of the society. Of course, you know from research, your own and others, that Greeks also, when they first came to the States, they also suffer a lot of discrimination. But you, as a young person, growing up in a multicultural environment, in particular in Queens or in Queens College, which is by far very diverse, linguistically, racially, or ethnically, how that makes sense to you? And if you think that the Greek Americans are racist, or they understand the problem that exists.
Right. With the issue of like Black Lives Matter and a lot of the ways that Greek Americans respond, the way I viewed it as someone who, you know, who's like me having graduated college and everything, one of the things that I realized is that a lot of it, or some of it, has to do with sort of a lack of general history or knowledge of that. A lot of Greek Americans that I know fail to realize that we ourselves went through the same thing with the Turks, with the Ottoman Empire and the occupation. And, you know, even to this day, we still feel the effects of that, whether it be certain mindsets that we have, more aspects of our political system out in Greece. And I think a lot of Greek Americans who don't look back on the history or don't realize these things, sort of because of that, they're not as informed, I would say, to these issues. A lot of the patterns that I see with Black Lives Matter and a lot of the struggles that they face were struggles that Greeks face, not just when coming into America, but again, when being under occupation and everything, and also the reactions to coming out of that, because, you know, slavery wasn't that long ago in our country. So I definitely think that with a lot of the struggles that they have, you know, us Greeks have also had, and I think for us especially, there should be some level of understanding when it comes to that, and some more solidarity. Because one of the things that I immediately think back to is during the Civil Rights movement, when Martin Luther King Jr. was marching, you had the Archbishop who was marching with him. And again, because of that, that was something that, again, was based off of mutual understanding and just knowing what it was the right thing to do. So I think that's something that for a lot of Greek Americans, that's especially needed. And I think that's one of the things that before moving forward, we sort of have to look back into that history and see how to move on from there.
Very good. Yeah, yes, you're referring to Archbishop Iakovos, right?
Yeah.
In 1965. But also before that, since the 30s, many Greeks who were as immigrants here and had small businesses, small coffee shops or other kind of businesses, they employed African Americans. And also have the big example of the Tarpon Springs, the sponge divers, who collaborated and work with the Black community there. So it's not just the this great presence of Yaakov was that historical moment with Martin Luther King, but the Greeks traditionally had a common, a common force or a collaboration with the community. But you, as a child or as an adult, when you identify yourself as a Greek or as a Greek American or other members of your family, you ever felt any kind of discrimination of being of Greek descent in New York?
In New York,
or elsewhere? I doubt it in New York, but
no. In New York, I never faced any discrimination. I would say like the biggest one was them pronouncing my name wrong. So no, I haven't. In some ways, I had felt a little bit, not from like other Americans, but mainly from like a lot of people who are of Turkish descent. Just my experience in Queens College, it's funny because the Ikaros room, it's right next to the Muslim Student Association. And I've had two experiences where someone, like made a comment or anything like, it's Istanbul, it's not Constantinople, like all the Greeks should have perished with the wars. So it's very interesting because it like, discrimination against Greeks, you don't hear that. That's not mainstream, but I feel with a lot of these divisions that happen with a lot of ethnic groups, there is sort of still that animosity. And, those two instances came from people who were Turkish. I have one of my friends who's Turkish and we're really good friends. So again, it's an aspect of mentality. It's an aspect of just what your values are or your morals. And I think that's what informed a lot of the Greeks when they first came to America, because they knew what it meant to suffer. They had their own history and their own baggage. And when they came here, they had that mentality of, let's give everybody a chance or let's help out each other, because that's sort of what we have to do as people. And I think I mentioned Martin Luther King and Archbishop Yakovos because I feel like that's the only mainstream representation we get of that mentality, because most definitely just helping out someone or just having that common understanding, that's something that's intimate. It's not something that can be put on display. It's something that happens between everyday interactions. So it's aspects like that I use to help inform me and how I see the world and how I go about my life. And I think that's something that a lot of people should take into heart, just to give everyone a chance, give them the benefit of the doubt, and to help each other whenever we can.
It is very interesting. You mentioned that one of your best friends is a Turkish American.
Right.
As you know, this summer of 2020, it is a major crisis in the GNC between Turkey and
yes.
And also next year in 2021 coincides with the bicentennial celebration of the beginning of Greek War of Independence. How you learn? How do you know about the history of 1821, the War of Independence, and how that makes you feel? And if there are any organized events by your generation, by the new second generation to commemorate it?
Right. So it's funny because the way I learned about the war for independence and everything and the history under Ottoman Empire, before I took courses in Byzantine studies, I actually learned it back in Greek school. So, after we spend like an hour and a half learning about the language, we would take 30 minutes aside and to talk about the history of the war. And that's how I learned a lot about our Yortes, like Orchidea, Greek War of Independence, March 25th. Most of that was through my own cultural sphere and just those institutions, which is why I still think they're valuable in some way, because besides that, there isn't a lot of other outlets in order for people to be informed about that, unless you yourself as a person go out there looking for that information, whether it's taking a course in Greek studies or certain literature, or taking a class that focuses on a specific period of time in history. But that was the main way that I learned about these events. It was through Greek school and those institutions. Another way was later on in life through my own curiosity, with like a lot of the books that I bought. My father, he likes to read a lot of literature about Greeks during World War II, because that's a perspective that often goes unaccounted for or not studied as much. So that's one aspect that I learned a lot from that. And in terms of events, for instance, the Queens College Ikaros Club, they'll host an event in order to commemorate either the War of Independence, or whether it be like Orchid Day or anything. But besides that, the most I've ever seen in terms of like mobilization is someone posting, oh, today is Orchid Day, or today is this holiday, like on social media or something. Like there isn't that cohesive or.
Also, I think probably the highest event that the community does as an organized community is to organize the parade commemorating
right.
March 25th, which is the anniversary of the 1821. So you ever participated into the parade?
Yeah, I have participated in the parade. I've been there, and it's always good to go. You have Greeks who go, but then you have a lot of them who end up not going, or like coming up with an excuse of not to go. So at the same time, like some Greeks, they are motivated, but it's a matter of them like actually mobilizing for it.
Excellent. I think it was very informative and very interesting, the interview. I would like to conclude it with your remarks, your suggestions, your greetings about the Greek American community, and you as an American also of Greek descent, how and what you think about your generation and the future.
Right, absolutely. So with me and a lot of the Greek Americans in my generation, I think there's a lot of potential for us, and I think we have a lot of power when it comes to deciding how we want the community to grow and evolve during these times. And I think most importantly, what a lot of Greek Americans, what we have to start doing is to have that conversation of how are we going to represent our culture where we grew up, and how do we express that in an age where we have technology, we're in an age of diversity. Like how can we make Greeks stand out, and to also share in our culture, and how can we pass that down to the newer generations, and most importantly, how can we celebrate it? I think are aspects that we need to ask ourselves. It's interesting too, because we're still young and we're just starting out our professional careers and our actual lives. So we have to make these decisions when it comes to how do we want to pass down our culture? Should we continue with it? So it's just one of the more things to add onto the list of what we need to figure out in our lives. But with a lot of the stuff that I see and a lot of the enthusiasm, I think there is potential. Me personally, I think there will always be that interest or that desire to want to know more about Greeks, about what Greece is, or what our heritage is all about, or our identity. No matter what the generations are, I think there'll always be that level of wanting to know more and wanting to know about where we come from. And I think it's what we do with that in the future and how we proceed that I think will make the difference in how we should represent that identity to the rest of the world.
That was a great interview with Stavros Anastasio. A great interview on September 4th, 2020. Thank you very much. Stay healthy and well.
Thank you. What did you think of the interview? Was it good? Did I do everything right?
I think it was great.